I'm looking myself. I'm trying to find the
147.
147. All right. Let's sing a verse here of how great thou art. Now, here's the problem. Usually, like I said, Diana's the one that gets me started on a note. So someone's going to have to get me started. Can you get me started there, Chrissy? Here we go. My God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe displayed. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. All right, how about another one? Someone else got another song they'd like to pick out? I don't have. This is where Bill has a whole lot better handle on things. All right. Find one. How about we do this one? It's a Christmas song. If I picked the right one. My problem is sometimes like I'll pick a song and say, this is it. And Dinah said, no, that's not the wrong one. Same title, but different song. It's like, so 270, Joy to the World. Let's try that one, all right? 270, Joy to the World. All right, 270, Joy to the World. We'll just do one verse again there, and here we go. Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing. Let's do the last verse. He rules the world with truth and grace, and makes the nations prove the glories of his righteousness, and wonders of his love, and wonders of his love, and wonders of his love. All right, good. That was good. All right. Well, this is going to make this easy tonight. I just have a couple handouts to pass out. And there we go. We're also going to try something on the screen. It's basically the handout's going to be on the screen. And if you guys, I'll put these here if you guys want to grab some. All right. So I have somewhat of a confession. Some of what I'm doing here is maybe selfish. And it has to do with the fact that I have preached for years the same texts, and you can only do so much with those texts in Christmas. So I've kind of gone off the beaten path, and I'm kind of looking at stuff that people sometimes are challenged with, or they never thought about, or like on Sunday mornings, the idea of teaching the Christmas text while in their text, okay, and so that's kind of where I am this year, and I thought, well, I don't know about you, but this idea behind the Christmas tree is rather in some camps is quite controversial, all right, and we're going to see that in just a minute, and I'm here to tell you we wouldn't have Christmas trees up here if I felt like there was something wrong, okay? So ease your mind if you're like, oh no, where's it going to go? It's not what I want to do, but I do think if you ever run into some people, you might want to, you might have something in your arsenal to be able to talk to them about and discuss if they ever get on the topic. Because when it was presented to me, I was like, yeah, that definitely looks like the Christmas tree. I guess we're not supposed to have Christmas trees, you know? And then you start looking into history, and you find that the Christmas tree really wasn't widely accepted until, you know, a little over 100 years ago here in this country, okay? And so I have just a printout that I kind of cut and paste there from the history, basically the History Discovery Channel, and gives you a little history of the Christmas tree. Our text will be over in over in Jeremiah. But the history of the Christmas tree goes back to the evergreens in ancient Egypt. Now, let's just clarify something here. I said, they have evergreens in Egypt, in the Middle East? Nothing like what you see here, okay? Nothing. All right, they're very, the branches have hardly any green on them at all, but because they stay green all year long, they're called the evergreens, okay? And the ancient Romans and German traditions, later on, the Romans would continue this, and then the Germans primarily picked this up, specifically under Martin Luther. And so that's kind of where we get it. The Germans were the primary ones that would use it. And so one of the things about it is that people start to get a little concerned about, because when we look at this text, you're going to say, man, that looks just like the Christmas tree. What am I going to do? But we're going to talk a little bit more as we go along with this, but a lot of pagan practices are always around the sun, the moon, the stars, the seasons, okay? And winter solstice is one of those areas, okay? Winter solstice is one of those areas. Just like Halloween comes on a high pagan day, the Druid holiday, okay? And that's where Halloween comes in. It just kind of carries over into the culture in one form or another. And that's why that's on October 31st. Then on November 1st, we have what's called All Saints Day, right? Which is supposed to be the counter to that, okay? Leap ahead into February, and you go down to New Orleans, and you have Mardi Gras, okay? Well, that's tied to the next day was the beginning of Lent, okay? So everybody's out doing whatever for the devil, and then they all have to come back and, get right again with God, So that's the whole concept there, right? And so if you even go into Easter, the concept of Easter has a lot of pagan practices have kind of carried over too. And that's true of Christmas. We have a lot of pagan practices have kind of carried over into the culture. But that doesn't mean that God is saying, don't do it, all right? And that's why I just wanted to kind of go down into this a little bit and talk about it a little bit more. So like I said, basically these came to us, Christmas trees came from Germany in the 16th century. And really Martin Luther, the 16th century Protestant reformer, is kind of given credit for some of this. And he basically, from the story I understand, it's not in this, but from others I've read, he basically got the idea of looking through the pine trees and seeing the stars, and got the concept of light on the trees. And that's how he started to decorate and and because of the strong influence he had in Germany with the Lutheran movement, people started to pick this up as a seasonal thing to do, okay? So the question is, well, then how did the Christmas trees come to the United States? Well, we see here that in the 1830s we have the first record of some coming by German settlers into Pennsylvania. And the very first recorded Christmas tree in Boston was in 1896. That's not in your notes either, but that just comes from previous studies. So the idea is that, again, when you talk about how long Christmas trees have been in this country, they haven't been here that long. And the question is, well, should they be here at all? Some pose it. Part of what stimulated this is, if you notice, if you go to the next page, it's not surprising that, like many other festive Christmas customs, the tree was adopted late in America. And notice that the Pilgrims were against even celebrating Christmas at all. Oliver Cromwell did not like the idea of the tradition of Christmas. Charles Spurgeon, you might be surprised, was not a fan of Christmas and the celebration of Christmas. And they always tied it to, like with Charles Spurgeon specifically, if you study some of the things he wrote about it, he tied it, he was really dead set against what he called popery. And I think you know where that leads when it comes to Roman Catholicism. I mean, he was really out there on that particular area. And so the idea of not celebrating Christmas. But remember, last Wednesday night, I kind of dealt with the topic of it's probable that, in fact, Jesus Christ was what? He was, what's the word I want? I'm now missing. Conceived. That's the word I was looking for, but I couldn't find it. He was conceived probably during this time. Okay, so there is some biblical grounds to kind of celebrate. The other thing that we'll look at just briefly is the idea that, you know what, God says we should be involved in a lot of feasts, and a lot of celebrations. For instance, if we had to go by what the Bible said about every feast that we celebrate, well, we wouldn't have birthdays. Hence, Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate birthdays. Okay, and so the idea of a feast is just having a party, something to remember something by, and Christmas has kind of developed into this time of year, and I think appropriately. And so there are obviously a lot of pagan and secular practices with Christmas that we probably ought to be concerned about, but this isn't one of those things that I think we need to get too far into, okay? So by the 1840s, Queen Victoria and her German Prince Albert started to be sketched into pictures showing Christmas trees, and that's when you start to see this movement really take off in England and eventually really start to spread to the United States. Okay, so by the 1890s, Christmas ornaments were arriving from Germany. Christmas trees were becoming more popular, and by the 20th century, obviously we see Christmas trees almost in everything that we go forward with. So it has become an American tradition, and I'd like to just refer to this as an American tradition. I'm not trying to get into anything, but when you get to this, and in fact, this is so fresh. There's a couple of things that I think I should share right now. Number one, I believed this way for many years. My wife and I don't think she believed. I think she's just being a nice wife and following what I thought to do on this area, right? And I mean, I went to the extreme with this whole thing, all right? So it's not like, you're not talking to someone who hasn't gone to one side of the spectrum and way over there and now has worked his way back to, I hope, a more balanced position, okay? The other side of this is I was really sympathetic. I was on in Facebook, there's certain chats, and there's these pastor chats, and a guy got on there. He'd just been invited. He just got saved. He just came out of the drug culture, and he was one of his questions in there, and I get it. He was very zealous, but without knowledge kind of concept. He wanted to talk to his pastor about why they shouldn't have Christmas trees, and I was like, oh, I get him. I was there. That's me. And so thankfully there were people giving good, wise counsel so he could go. But the basis he was using was on the text that we're now going to look at, which is here in Jeremiah chapter number 10. Okay, so I put a little note here that says there is a greater issue in this text other than Christmas trees. All right, and if you've heard me say it once, I want to say this. If God doesn't spend a lot of attention on something, we probably don't need to either, okay? If God doesn't spend a whole lot of effort in trying to explain or get us to get into the mode or practice of it, I don't think we have to either. And so, but the problem is that sometimes we get hung up on these sort of things, and then we minimize the things that God really is maximizing and really trying to get across, okay? And so I want to just kind of put that out there. This is the only place you're going to see trees all through the Bible, but nothing that you could link to Christmas trees other than maybe this text, and I'm going to show you can't even link this one, okay, but we're going to go there. So the greater issue at hand is worshiping the true God who is alive and well, and he brings the weather from heaven. The lesser issue is whether the Christmas tree is indeed an idol or not, and that's where we go in this study. So the text is on the left-hand side, my notes are on the right-hand side, and we kind of just follow along. Jeremiah 10:1, hear ye the word which the Lord speaketh unto you, O house of Israel. Now remember, Jeremiah is speaking to not a very um, devout group. Okay, these are not folks that got it all together. So God's not going to come along and praise this people right now, right? Oh, you need they're back there. I'm sorry, Rosemary, they're right back there. Last seat on the left there. So, he goes on in verse 2. Thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven. For the heathen are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are vain. For one cutteth a tree out of the forest, and the work of his hands of the workman with the axe. They deck it with silver and gold. So right away, do you hear Burl Ives? Silver and gold, right? So there's this already, you got this association, right? Okay, it must be a Christmas tree because it's talking about silver and gold. No, that doesn't mean that's what that means, okay? Just saying, all right? And then they fasten it with nails and with hammers that it may not move, so it has to stand erect. There it is again. It must be the Christmas tree. No, not necessarily, but let's just keep going a little bit. And they are upright as the palm tree. Now remember, this is one of my points at the end, is this is the Middle East. They have nothing that looks like a pine tree there, okay? It's like they're just, if they even look like it, they're like, no, we would say, no, that's not even close, okay? It's just the way it is. They don't have that kind of thing. So, but they have palm trees, right? They have palm trees, all right? And the other thing about the trees over there that we're talking about to some degree is, what we're looking at is a tree that has a stalk. And there's a reason for that, okay? And we're going to notice here. It says, they must needs be born because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil. Neither also is it in them to do good. So he's referring to this, what? Idol. This tree. He says, don't be afraid of them. There's nothing to them. They can't do evil or good, all right? There's nothing to them, right? Now, for he goes, for as much as there is none like unto thee, O Lord. So he makes this comparison. This idol, this tree, stock, and the true living God, okay? And he goes on to talk about, for as much as there none like thee, O Lord, thou art great, and thy name is great in heaven. We just sang that song, How Great Thou Art, right? And then who would not fear thee, O King of nations? For to thee doth it appertain. For as much as among all the wise men of the nations and in their kingdoms, there is none like unto thee. And then, again, verse 8, but they are altogether brutish and foolish. The stock is a doctrine of vanities. This is important, this stock, all right? Because we've seen it even in our own cultures here, the use of the stock, all right? The idea of the totem pole, right? Isn't that what that kind of, they take the tree and they carve it out, and what's usually on there is either the genealogies or primarily their gods, okay? And so we're talking about the stock. Silver is spread into plates and is brought from Tarshish, and gold from Uphaz, the work of the workman in the hands of the founder. Blue and purple is their coloring. So we use red and green, so already we can tell it's not, right? I'm being facetious. I'm being a little bit sarcastic. And there's a reason for that. And they are all the work of cunning men. But the Lord is the true God. So we see how he's making this connection. There's a true God, and this idol is not. And so it goes on from there a little bit further. We come down, and I'm not going to get going too far because I want to get into the notes here. But it goes verse 14, every man is brutish in his own knowledge, every founder. So now we're getting into the idea of idolatry again. The people who do it is confounded by the graven image, for his molten image is falsehood, and there is no breath in them. They are vanity and the work of errors. In the time of their visitation they shall perish. And then he goes on to make a comparison. Verse 16, the portion of Jacob is not like unto them, for he is the former of all things, and Israel is the rod of his inheritance. The Lord of his host is his name. Gather up thy wares out of the land, O inhabitants of the fortress. And for thus saith the Lord, behold, I will sling out the inhabitants of the land. And then he gets into, God starts to speak, and then Jeremiah speaks. And really, in verse 21, this is where you hear me say go along a lot of times, especially in the writings of Jeremiah. Jeremiah is speaking for God, and God has very little respect for the pastors. So you look at verse 21, the pastors have become brutish. Why have they become brutish? Because they're into idolatry. That's what the connotation is. and have not sought the Lord. Therefore they shall not prosper, and all their flocks shall be scattered. So when we spring forward, and Jesus looks upon the fields, and he says they are sheep without a shepherd, why is that? Because of the pastors. The pastors have let that happen. And I recall having a conversation with a really good friend of mine, but he was doing some things that were not right, and I kind of was challenging him in this, and he was talking about how he was right, and I said, the way you're acting more like the pastors out of Jeremiah 23 and Ezekiel 34, and maybe you should go check those out just to make sure, because they were the ones scattering the sheep. Okay, they were scattering the sheep. So this is where this kind of goes. So Jeremiah is putting a lot of the responsibility on the pastors. The pastors are practicing it. They're allowing it in the people of Israel. And so now let's go up and check our notes and come on down. I just gave you kind of a real fast run on this text. So some basic thoughts that come from the text, which are kind of overall throughout the whole chapter. A, learn not the way of the heathen. That's good advice. Let's not go after the ways of the heathen. Be not dismayed at the signs of heaven. So what was happening, and you know this from your own readings, your own education, paganism is tied many times, like we talked about, to the weather, to the fertility gods who would bring what? Bring soil, would bring seed to fruit. The sun that would bring the right amount of sun, the rain that would bring the right amount of rain, the seasons. All those things are tied a lot of times, and this would dismay them if things weren't going like that. Climate change would just blow them away, right? This whole concept behind that. So that's why, and by the way, think about that a little bit. We're living in an age that has less God, but more emphasis on climate and the signs of heaven, right? So the heathens are dismayed by this, and then C, be not afraid of them. They cannot do evil. They cannot do good. So the idols cannot do evil, the idols cannot do good. The customs of the people are vain. So they go out, they cut out the forest, the work of the axe. We have that visual in our mind, especially from, if you're a Little House on the Prairie or something like that minded, you can remember, Dad going out with the axe and cutting down the tree and bringing it into the little cabin. And so we have all these images. And they deck it with silver and gold, and we talked about that. And they fasten it with nails, and it's upright, and it speaks not. And then, but none is like unto thee, O Lord. So the emphasis of this text is not just a tree that seems to look like Christmas. The emphasis of this text should be, there's none like unto thee, O Lord. That's the emphasis of the text. That's where Jeremiah is driving this. Why is it that you get caught up into this idolatry of shaving down the branches off of a stalk, molding it, cutting it, carving it into the image that you want, covering it with the plates of silver, in other words, letting that silver and gold go around it and form to it so that it's preserved, and then you upright it and you anchor it down so it's always there in your home or in your yard, or it's even in the temple, wherever these things were, and you're going to bow to it. We talked about Ahaz the last couple of weeks. Ahaz had these kind of things going on all over the corners of Jerusalem. So this was very prevalent, and God is addressing this through the prophet Jeremiah. So notice with the Lord, he is the true God, he is the living God, he's the everlasting God according to this text. At his wrath the earth shall tremble, the nations shall not be able to abide in his indignation. So again, he's making a comparison. Can your tree do that? Can your stalk that you just put together, can it do that? And I know they say that it represents their God, but Jeremiah is saying, no, my God does this, the true God. He's the one that can do any of this. He's the creator. Every man is brutish in his own knowledge. Every founder is confounded by his graven image. And by the way, I love this. Does idolatry exist today? It does. But it has even broader application than a lot of us can even imagine. One of the things that stands out, it's not just the, going to certain religions, and you have Buddha, and you'll have, you might go to other places and there'll be other statues. I mean, I was raised Roman Catholic, so there was always the bowing to the Virgin Mary, and just lighting candles. I mean, the irony of it, and I know it sounds criticism. I hope those that might be Catholic that are watching. It just the irony is that we would spend more time praying to Mary than we would to God. I realized that in parochial school. That just was like, why do we do that? You know, I mean, you take the rosary. I mean, there's 50 prayers to Mary, and a whole lot less to God, like the Our Fathers. There's, you know, so you're kind of like, that doesn't make sense, you know. And so there is one true God, and He's the Creator God. And so the other side of idolatry is the idea behind Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was creating his own image of what he wanted everyone to see him as, and he wanted everybody to bow and worship. Do you know what we do in our idolatry today? We don't necessarily go out and get a stalk of a tree, cut it down, but we want everybody to see the image that we're trying to create. You see what I'm saying by that? We are sometimes guilty of idolatry because we want to portray an image to somebody and be what we're not. We were just talking about a young man that's in Brother Chris's class, and he made this very profound statement. Mr. Russell said, you know, it's hard being someone you're not, isn't it? It is. God never created you to be that way. But we're always trying to create this image, you know, that we want people to bow to, or, you know, not so, but see worth in, like the idea of worship, behind the idea of worship. So we're always creating that image. And that's idolatry. And what does God have to do sometimes in our own image making? Crush it, knock it down, you know, like the Ark of the Covenant before Dagon. Put it back up, next day, you know. And so this is how God does. He's just knocking down our images until we're finally going to subject. And thankfully, the 3 Hebrew children really got it right away, you know. Well, we're not bowing to your image. And notice, you always know when people get really bent out of shape that you're not bowing to their image. Like at Nebuchadnezzar. What do they want to do? Get that furnace burning, throw it in the furnace. And that's what they want to do. They go on the attack. They go on the offense if you're not going to, you know, give to that particular image that they've been trying to create. And now they want to zing it to you, right? And so that's always stood out to me with people that, you know, that sometimes I have some conflict with. I know it's hard for you to believe I have conflict with anybody, but the fact is, that was way too much laughing in the back. I'm just saying, all right? But the reality is, you know, when you work with people and you begin to realize, oh, I didn't bow to their image the way they wanted to, that's why I'm now the brunt of whatever they're saying or doing now. So we move on. The molten image is a falsehood. There is no breath in that image, hence it's vain. It's a work of heirs. And that's all in this text. See, so we have basically out of 20-some verses, probably about 3 or 4 that deal with the stock. But we always put the emphasis, a lot of people who, like I said, are of the persuasion this might be the Christmas tree, are all, see, it's the Christmas tree, it's Christmas tree, it's Christmas tree. No, it's really a small percentage of what's being talked about in this chapter. The emphasis is on the true living God, not on this particular idol, okay? Now, moving along a little bit, just with some of the time, the portion of Jacob is not like them, who are brutish in his knowledge. They're confounded by the graven image. They're vain and in error and won't perish. That goes back to the idea of people make idols unto themselves. You know, the idol can't see or hear. Guess what happens to the person that's making an idol, whether it's their own image or it's another image that they bow down and worship? They can't see or hear either. They become like the idol, and that comes out of Psalm 101. They become like the thing, okay? And so there's a lot of, you know, we could run that a little bit more with a lot of other things, but here's where I really go to when we get down to around Jeremiah 10:19. Notice this is God. God is speaking here. Woe is me for my hurt. Do you ever think about God gets hurt? God has pain. God is grieved. I mean, we say grieve not the Holy Spirit. God feels pain. My wound is grievous, but I said, truly this is a grief, and I must bear it. My tabernacle is spoiled, and all my cords are broken. My children are gone forth of me, and they are not. There is none to stretch forth my tent anymore, and to set up my curtains. For the pastors have become brutish, and have not sought the Lord. Therefore they shall not prosper, and all their flocks shall be scattered. He's talking about the tabernacle. You know, he's talking, that's the idea of the tents, the pastors, the priests. They're not there anymore. and it hurts him. It hurts him a lot. And then we have Jeremiah comes back and speaks here, and he says, "O Lord," verse 23, "I know that the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. O Lord, correct me, but with judgment, not in thine anger, lest thou bring me to nothing. Pour out thy fury upon the heathen that know thee not, and upon the families that call not on thy name. For they have eaten up Jacob and devoured him and consumed him and have made his habitation desolate." So the heathen have had an influence on the people of God. And what Jeremiah says, and I think that's what all of us need to do with whatever we do, is say, God, correct me. I can't do anything about the pastors. I can't do anything about the heathen. I can't do anything about those that are necessary. They're bowing to idols, and they shouldn't be. I would like to, if you give me opportunity, I'll do the best I can. But Lord, it starts with me. Correct me, and not with anger, because if you get hot with me, I'm nothing. I'm dead. I'm done. There's nothing I can do if you get angry with me. But he goes on to say, here's why, Lord, I'd rather you pour out your wrath or your fury on the heathen, because of what they've done to eat up Jacob and devour him and consume him and his habitation. Okay, so some basic understandings from the text at the bottom there. Some basic understandings of the text. The text is specific to the time and problems of Israel during the ministry of Jeremiah. Okay, to say that it applies to 21st century Christianity in the United States is a far stretch. Okay, but it does. We need to always go back to the fact that the text is speaking first to the people of that age and that day and the problems that were happening in the time of Jeremiah. Number two, the tree or stalk of the tree has been crafted for the purpose of idolatry. All right? So putting up a Christmas tree does not mean I have purpose to do this. Okay? Now, I'm going to tell you that people have really made this stretch because they say, well, it is an idol because what you do on Christmas morning is you get down on your knees and you get the gifts that it has presented to you. And you're like, that's kind of a far stretch. And it isn't really what is happening. Okay? I didn't put the tree up to be worshipped. It's just there, okay, as a decoration, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Number three, the traditional Christmas tree does not grow in Israel. Like I said, the palm tree is mentioned here. The stalk of the tree is used to carve the image, much like a totem pole. It is decked in precious metal. They would fasten it so it could stand erect. They colored it in this case with blue and purple, which was an expensive dye. Remember, Lydia was a seller of purple, and this was one of the few dyes that they could get to color their, I think it was flax material that they had, and linen, and people who could do that had to have money to do it. So this is where they could get this. So they used expensive dyes to try to do this. This crafted tree was intended to be worshipped. Pagans used trees because it was usually inexpensive and available, unlike metal that would be hard to find and it would have to be manufactured or founded. Pagans worshiped the gods of heaven, sun, moon, stars, rain, seasons, etc. The winter solstice is a natural time of year for pagans to feast because, remember, I was just having this conversation with the boys the other day about what is the shortest day of the year. Well, December 21st, around that area, winter solstice. When is the longest day? Well, in the summer, all right? And I said, by the way, really, basically, the Bible only really talks primarily of two seasons, winter and summer. I mean, basically. I said, the others, we've kind of added, to kind of have what we call 4 seasons, but really comes down to the way the sun is positioned and the length of day and the shortness of day. Because the pagans would know, and as we know from science, is that when the winter solstice comes, what? Days start to get longer, right? And they go all the way until summer solstice, the longest day, and then they start going shorter again, right? And so that's why it would make sense in the winter for them to say, we've made it. We got longer days now. We're getting closer to harvest, or to planting seed and eventually harvest. And so they would definitely want to do that, just like many of us do. So moving on, some basic conclusions from the text. And the tree is not the Christmas tree here by any means. The tree in Jeremiah 10 is worshipped throughout the year, while the Christmas tree is an annual decoration one time a year. Christmas trees fundamentally are not worshipped anywhere in the world. Number 3, usually using seasonally appropriate decorations are not wrong, just as pumpkins in fall and flowers in the summer. So a lot of people this time of year, if they wanted to decorate their homes but they couldn't get flowers, what would they do? Go get evergreens, right? And decorate. All things are lawful, but not all things are expedient. Principle is in the Bible. I have tremendous liberty in the Spirit. All things are lawful, not all things are expedient. And then I put in the Romans 14:1 and 15:1. It's a long chapter, but I'll just hit the kind of the crux of it. The treatment of brothers that have differing views. One man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. So, if it's really important for you not to have a Christmas tree, and you do it unto the Lord, it's between you and the Lord. If I have no problem with it, and I see nothing in the Bible, it's what? Still between me and the Lord. Doesn't mean you're better than I am, doesn't mean I'm better than you. The idea is that's how you prefer to worship, that's how you prefer to go forward, that's how you prefer to do it. That's between you and God. That's not my business. Okay? So he goes on to say, verse 6, he that regardeth the day regardeth as unto the Lord. He that regardeth not the day to the Lord, he doth not regard it. He that eateth, eateth to the Lord, for he giveth God thanks. And he that eateth not to the Lord, he eateth not and giveth God thanks. So there is this issue of the meat issue that we get into sometimes in 1 Corinthians 8 through 10. Some people were getting really bothered that out of the temple of Diana in Corinth, they would buy meat because it would be sacrificed unto the idol Diana, and then it would be sold out the backside, out of what they call the shambles. Well, it was a way for the temple to make money, but it was also a cheap way to get some good meat. I mean, obviously, they're bringing good stuff here to be sacrificed, and people would come along and buy it, and then they would serve it. But it was a stumbling block to some Christians of that day to say, this has been offered to an idol. I can't eat this food. And Paul was saying, we know there's nothing to an idol. But if it's important to you, as a brother, I'm not going to get into it with you. I won't serve it. I won't even eat it if it's that important to you. Okay? And so this is the principle that is kind of going through here. Romans 14:7. For none of us liveth to himself, no man dieth to himself. For whether we live unto the Lord. Whether we die unto the Lord. Whether we live therefore or die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ both died and rose and revived, that he might be Lord both of the dead and the living. But why dost thou judge thy brother? Or why dost thou set at naught thy brother? For we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And this is just a small section in a lot of verses that deal with this topic. It's profound. We've been covering a little bit in our 611s because it ties with this. Well, we already were in 611. I was dealing with the meat issue anyways. So this text is really important on how we should deal with people who have differing views. Okay? Then I just put in Isaiah 44, the folly of idolatry, because it looks very similar to the text that we just read in Jeremiah 10, and it also gives us a little bit more insight into what these idols would look like and what they were used for and why they were there. And the interesting thing is, he said they would cut this tree down, and then he said they only treat that one part as holy, even though the whole tree was supposed to be holy unto them. But they only treat that stalk as holy. Everything else, it's almost like Isaiah's mocking. He says, but all the other stuff you just throw in the fire and burn it up like it's nothing. That doesn't make sense. So there's just a lot in here about this, and again, it's just if you're going to sit down with someone who, and I wish for this young man that just trusted the Lord. He just sounds like he just came out of the drug culture. I would love to sit down with him and just say, here, brother, don't maximize things that God has not given a lot of attention to. I really appreciate your zeal. I appreciate what you're trying to say and what you're doing. I think you sense you want to be sanctified, you want to be holy, you want to be separate from what the heathen practices were that you were involved in the past, and I get it. But this isn't the hill that you want to die on this one. Okay, this is not the place. Okay, there's other things that we should be talking about and encouraging people in, and this is probably not one of those. Okay, because there's just so many reasons that you can go to why it's not the Christmas tree here and why it's appropriate to have seasonal decorations this time of year as well. Okay, any questions or comments on that? All right, so that kind of just wraps up, and like I said, I'm just going to kind of going to kind of do that and just kind of pick some of these texts that, I think I did a lesson on Santa Claus one time. And we might have to bring Santa Claus into this, And again, people look into that whole Santa Claus thing, if you just kind of move the words around, it spells Satan, or the letters around, it spells Satan, and he's in red, and he's eternal, and he gives gifts, and but there is a true story that goes along with a guy by the name of Saint Nick, which apparently did some things, and it just kind of sprung forth out of that. And so for me, I've never we've never told our kids about that there was a Santa Claus. I'd never wanted them to mistrust anything we ever said, so I never tell them that. I said all good things that we have come from God, and we're going to spend this day to talk about gifts and gift giving because God gave us the greatest gift of all, Jesus Christ, and we want to talk about that and show how that goes. So there's a lot of things that are out there that sometimes people are like, really? And it's like, yeah, let's go to the scripture and find out. Okay, let's just look at it. Okay, all right. So with that, let's take some prayer requests.